What is going on to all my You fans out there, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again with a brand new Netflix series review, and today we are breaking down the latest season of You, Season 3, a season in which we see Joe and his new wife and mother of their newborn child, Love, move into the suburbs in hopes to maybe forget their past, have a new life, have this new domestic type of life. Will it work? Will it blow up in their face? We're going to break it all down here in this review, but before we dive into it all, make sure you're checking me out on all my other social media accounts. If you all are new to this channel, well, welcome to the community. Consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. That way you can get the alert from when I drop new content. If you enjoyed this review, well, make sure to like and share the review. It helps out the channel a lot, but I also appreciate the support. And in those comments, once you've seen this third season, let me know, number one, if you've seen all 3 seasons of You, which is your favorite season out of 3, but more importantly, once you've seen this new season, we got to talk about it. Your pros, your cons. What were some of your favorite moments, your favorite twists, your favorite turns, your favorite new character? And by the time this video is out, listen, we already got the announcement of Season 4, so what do you hope to see in a Season 4 of You? But let's also talk about some criticisms. What were some things that didn't work for you, some plots that didn't work for you? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. So first and foremost, just a quick little breakdown of how I handle my Netflix reviews. Is this your first time tuning in? Welcome. Hope you're enjoying it so far. If you're returning, you know what the love is. It's always good to see you. But the way I like to handle these Netflix reviews is the first half, no spoilers, just pros, cons, getting into what worked, what didn't work without spoiling anything, and then I'll give you my rankings of all 3 seasons. And then the second half of this video, spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. We're breaking down, I got my notes here, we're breaking down the episodes. I'm going to give you my predictions of what I hope to see in Season 4, and we're going to have a discussion spoiling everything about Season 3. So with all that being said, time codes and all that stuff will be in the description so you can kind of know how this video will be structured. So let's get into my fandom of this show. I would say I'm a little bit obsessed, to say the least, about this show. Season 1, and I'm going to rank them at the end, but I'm not the biggest fan of Season 1 per se. Like, it's not my favorite season. I'll just say that. I enjoyed it for what it was, but it wasn't as rich as Season 2. And Season 3, oh my goodness, we're going to break it down, was absolutely bonkers. But does that mean it's the best season yet? We'll talk about that here in the review. But the reason that I keep coming back to this show, to me, it kind of scratches that itch that I haven't gotten in so long, which is that Dexter itch, which is seeing this person, anti-hero of a sense, thinking they're doing good by taking out bad people. But obviously the big appeal for me, at least, is how the hell is Joe, or like when I was watching Dexter, how are they going to get out of this situation? Who are they going to backstab? Who are they going to put the blame on? How are they going to figure this out? That's kind of why I keep coming back to this show, as well as there's some good stuff going on here in regards to, it has some commentary about relationships and how people kind of forget who they are to please their partner, and that's essentially the theme of this season. As they say, happy wife, happy life. So let's break this down, non-spoiler portion here. Going into my positives, I got to start off with the 2 stars of this show, and that is Joe and Love. And let's start talking about Love here, who I'm a big fan of Victoria as an actress. When I first saw her in The Haunting of Hill House and in Bly Manor, she's a fantastic actress. And when she entered the mix in Season 2, matching bar for bar, toe for toe, kill for kill with Joe, it was very entertaining. It really added like this new dynamic and this new kind of entertaining factor to Season 2. And now seeing them full-time in a relationship with a baby, a newborn baby, in this suburb of Madre Linda is so fascinating. But let's focus a little bit on Love here. She was something else in this season, ladies and gentlemen. If you thought she was crazy, you thought she was wild, you thought she was madly in love with Joe in Season 2, well, you got another thing coming to Season 3. She's trying to be the best wife. She's trying to be the best mother for her newborn child. But just like Joe, she has her urges. She has her temper. She has her ways about her where she just wants to protect her family at all costs. And seeing Victoria just playing all the dimensions, there's so much layers to both of these characters. But again, focusing on Love, there's so much that she offers to the show. Again, we see, very similar to Joe, her, yes, she has privilege, she has money, but she's also come from a family of privilege, and she's come from that kind of being given things. And again, she wants to protect her family for, as we know in Season 2, literally killed someone and blamed her brother for it. So she does have some effed up ways about her, but you learn more about Love in this season in regards to her relationship with her mom, Dottie, and not having that stable foundation of a good home, and kind of learning from her parents and trying to fix the mistakes from her parents. And that's really kind of another big theme with Joe as well as Love, is trying to be better than their parents that didn't raise them properly. So I thought Love added a really good dynamic to this season. man, she does some crazy stuff, some frustrating stuff. You're like, love, why are you doing this? But again, you learn why she's doing this because we get more backstory. I want a little bit more. I'll leave that to my criticism with a little bit more understanding of Love, but you get the gist of where she's coming from as a character. But I thought Love was pretty fantastic. But we got to talk about her husband here, and that is Joe. This is 3 seasons now where Joe, man, and the show continues to give you more and more layers to this onion of Joe. And we learn more about Joe in this season, in particularly in the flashbacks, which some of them worked, some of them didn't. But the stuff that did work in the flashbacks, you kind of understand this pattern that Joe has in regards to he's a fixer. He always wants to fix broken things. Sometimes he's fixed broken things by breaking them even more in the case of murdering people. But we get more backstory of where Joe comes from, his idea of like being forgotten about with his mom. And there's a particular teacher that we meet in this particular season that gives us a little bit more context of why he is the way he is. So I love the backstory, even though some of it was a little bit redundant, which we'll leave for a little bit later. But let's focus on Joe, the father, and the husband. His whole goal this season is trying to be the best family guy that he can be, whether that is pretending to be friends with the neighbors, pretending to be sexually aroused by his wife, and pretending that he isn't obsessed with his neighbor and potentially obsessed with another character later on this season. And again, their whole thing is, can we be a team? Can we work together? Can we trust each other? And seeing our main character, Joe, tackle all that stuff. Again, not only is he dealing with his obsessions, dealing with his past, his demons, but he's trying to be a dad all at the same time, and a husband, and having a new job. It's a lot that Joe's going through in this season. And again, just like his wife, there were some moments that I just want to go on the screen and show the hell out of Joe because of the decision he makes. But again, it's a struggle for Joe this season in regards to, does it mean you have to be a good person to be a good father, is something that Joe tackles in this season. I thought that, again, Joe and the actor did a really good job. And again, the goal is marriage has to work for this family or else it's all going to fall apart. And he doesn't. His whole thing is, as he grew up in the system, he doesn't want his baby to grow up in that same system. So there's a lot of good stuff that we get with both of those characters. But I got to say, ladies and gentlemen, I was very pleasantly surprised by how the secondary characters kind of grew on me. And we all know each one of these seasons, whether it's Peach in season 1, whether it was 40 in season 2, and Delilah and all the other secondary characters that we got there, sometimes they're like a little bit over the top. They sometimes just kind of feel forced for levity, for drama's sakes. But I gotta say, man, at first when we moved to this new suburb, Mondre, Linda, I wasn't really feeling it. I thought that, number one, I think you were supposed to feel that way because we're looking at the 1 percentile, the very privileged people, the, Will and Jada type of couples that think that they look perfect on the outside, but there's a lot of internal struggle going on, on the inside. So at first I'm like, these couples, these characters are getting on my nerve. But as the show went on, I end up liking these characters. And I want to kind of start with my favorite couple of this new season. And hell, I would love a spinoff with these characters, whether it's a prequel or continuation, whatever the case may be. Sherry and Carrie Conrad. I mentioned Will and Jada. I think this might be a play on Will and Jada because let's just say they like to explore things in a relationship. I was kind of leave it at that, but I really enjoy what Carrie had to offer as you kind of get to know her character. She's kind of that stereotypical perfect mom. You got to know her to get into the good school. She has a blog. Everyone's following her orders. She's always eating good things and keto diets and all that stuff. But I really enjoy what Carrie offered to the season, especially in the second half of the show where her and Love become really good friends. I really enjoyed their dynamic. But Carrie, my man Carrie, when you see the show, episode 8, listen, Carrie and Cherry, again, give me a spin-off series with those two, but Carrie was a really interesting character. I don't really dive too much into them too much, but when you guys see the season, you know what I'm talking about. They were really fun additions, at least for me. I really enjoyed them. We get Dottie back, who, I'm going to say it now, I don't really care for Dottie. I think that the mom character, I know what they're giving the character, what she's supposed to do in the show, but I don't really have much to say about Dottie because the show really doesn't offer that much for her. But we have a character that I'm going to talk more about in the spoiler portion of this video, but there is a character by the name of Marianne who is the boss of Joe when he works in a library. As we all know, he's obsessed with books, but Marianne was a very fascinating character and adds a very interesting dynamic to the show. Again, we'll talk more about her in the spoiler portion, but it was a character I enjoyed. But we got to talk a little bit about the neighbors. This is the neighbors that cause some issues with our main family, and that is led by Matthew, his wife Natalie, and their stepson Theo. And let's just say Natalie and Joe, there's some things that may or may not be there between the two, but it definitely sets the stage for this season. And Natalie is a realtor, very well known in the neighborhood. And again, there's maybe a thing between her and Joe. You'll have to see the season and see what plays out there, but that's kind of the catalyst of how things kick off in the season. And then the husband's in the mix. He's a tech guy who's never home, played by Scott Speisman, who I haven't seen him since like the Underworld series. He was a really cool addition. But Theo's another character I'm gonna leave for a little bit more in depth in the spoiler portion. But Theo, he was pretty frustrating this season. He's a teenager. He has his sights on one of the Joe's wife in this season. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. But again, I thought the dynamic of the new characters and this whole kind of, again, the 1%, suburban, stereotypical, privileged people that don't really have problems, that just force problems about gossip. It's like Desperate Housewives essentially is a little bit of that in this season, which again shines a light on domestication and people being phony and just pretending to be happy, which again is the kind of the main theme of this season, is watching these two characters, Love and Joe, trying to find contentment, trying to find happiness, even though they haven't addressed their past, they haven't addressed their demons. We're watching Love trying to still grieve with her brother and process the death of her brother, her twin brother that she loved to death, and her soulmate essentially. And 40, we're watching Joe, all the stuff he's been through. He really hasn't had time to decompress, to compartmentalize all the stuff he's went through. So we're trying to watch these two people who are not in love with themselves trying to make love happen is a very fascinating thing, as well as, like I said, that just kind of speaks on this whole town that they're in. Everyone's trying to fit in, and everyone's trying to put themselves in a box and trying to be the stereotypical husband and wife and kids and picket fence and successful businesses and successful TED Talks or what have you. So it was a really interesting, fascinating way that they tackled this season. But again, for death do their part is a big thing between these two couples, and it was a little bit of Gone Girl situation this season. Again, it's a very interesting, entertaining, very frustrating in the best way possible season. But let me transition a little bit into my criticisms before we dive deeper into the spoilers here in a second. I gotta say, I thought the setup was very intriguing. The first episode, as I kind of predicted, I kind of knew how things were going to shake out. I didn't expect it to happen so early in episode 1, but it kind of sets the stage for what we can see in Love and Joe trying to be different, but their inner demons start to come into a rise when they come across certain characters in this show. But the first half was interesting. The weakest part of this season for me is that middle portion. I want to say episodes 4, 5, and 6. They weren't terrible, but it was just like the show, it hit into a rut, which kind of ties into another one of my criticisms. I don't think this episode, or I should say this season, it doesn't need to. I don't know why Netflix feels like, okay, we had 10 episodes in season 2, we had 10 episodes in season 1, we got to have 10. I don't think they had to do that. I really feel like the show was a little bit too drowned out, and it really kind of shows in that middle half where things just kind of felt repetitive. There was a lot of plot conveniences. There were a lot of like flashbacks that didn't really add a lot of context to the present timeline. So I thought that 4, 5, and 6 episodes were probably the weakest episodes for me personally, which again kind of brings me into, I mentioned how I really enjoyed Love's backstory in this episode, or this season particularly, but I wish there was a little bit more backstory, as we got a ton of flashbacks with Joe, which is a criticism I have in a bit here. I wish we would have gotten a little bit more flashbacks with Love when she was a child. We know what she did to obviously protect her brother 40, and that she killed someone, but I would have loved to have seen more of that dynamic between her and Dottie and their father, but we really don't get that in this season. Again, you understand where she's coming from to an extent, but I wish it would have fleshed out as we get fleshed out with Joe, which again, I appreciate Joe's flashbacks. We see him in the home, we see where he was raised, we see how his mom kind of, treated him as a child and what he did to his stepdad or his father in season 2. But I'm not going to lie, guys, some of those flashbacks that we got with Joe was very repetitive, very kind of, I checked out sometimes because it really didn't add that much. It seemed like they kept playing the same flashbacks of him being bullied and hiding in the closet. It was just a little bit too much for me. But again, those are just kind of like nitpicks, but I definitely have to say the second half of the episodes, 4, 5, and 6, weren't my favorite. I wish we got more fleshed out of Love. I wish we didn't have as many backstories as Joe, and I really do wish they maybe would have slimmed down Maybe 8 episodes would have been a more concise, more tight story for me personally, but those are my criticisms for season 3. So before I give you my overall thoughts and let you know if this is my favorite season yet, make sure to like the video, share the video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and of course subscribe to the channel. Overall, I'm just going to say it, this is easily the best season of You. Season 3 is the best season in my personal opinion. It's entertaining. There's so many twists, there's so many turns. Like I mentioned, I really enjoyed the new dynamic of the characters that they introduced in this season, the relationship between Love and Joe and them trying to be the best spouses, the best parents, and how that conflicts with who they are as people. And again, you know, the drama's there, the absurdity's there, how are they going to get out of this situation's there. So all that stuff is there. Even though I have my criticism with the middle half of the season, I wish it was a little bit more fleshed out with the Love character, but overall, this is the best season of You, and it really gets me excited to see what they do with season 4. So as my rankings go, I gotta say, season 3 is my favorite, season 2 is my second favorite, and season 1 is my least favorite season of this show. But that's just my non-spoiler thoughts of this show. Again, let me know your thoughts in the comments. With all that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to transition over to the spoiler portion, spoiler discussion. We're going to probably go about 10 to 15 minutes. So again, I'm assuming you've seen the entire season, or if you're just watching episode by episode, you can kind of see how we're tackling this portion of the video. So with all that being said, spoilers, you've been warned. So let's talk about episode 1, which I think was a great episode to start off this season as we meet Henry. As we know right off the bat, Henry and Joe aren't really getting on the same page. Number one, he thought it was going to be a girl, and he was hoping that it wasn't going to be a boy because obviously the sins of his fathers and him being a boy, and he thinks the genetics will go to his son, which we'll talk about season 4, and if we get a big time jump and we see maybe a little Chucky doll running around Paris looking for his dad. But either way, they named the kid 40, which I'm like, that's not going to help you, Love, constantly calling your son 40 as their mom, as Dottie does continuously. But again, baby Henry is not the biggest fan of his dad. There's just like, he's not all in it. And that's something that Love notices right away, that he's not all in to his son yet, because again, he's like, I wanted a daughter. I'm going to F things up with my son, which again was a very interesting dynamic. But we got to talk about this neighbor, Natalie, who was, making her move. And Joe, he was right for the very first time in a long time. She was into him. I don't know if Natalie had previous affairs with anyone else in the town. It looks like she probably did, but neither here nor there. Her and Joe hit it off. She invites him to get some wine. They ultimately, she breaks the glass. He's taking care of her, all that stuff, and they ultimately kiss. But to my surprise, Joe's like, nope. I want to make this work. I want to be the perfect husband. I want to be the father for my child. I can't do this, Natalie. But unfortunately, things just get a little bit too hot and steamy, and things don't work out for the two. But we'll talk about Natalie in a second. But as he's, denying Natalie, he goes right home to his wife. Unfortunately, he took those panties, and we'll talk about the box here in a second. But it's in this first episode where I'm thinking, okay, Natalie, she's going to die sooner rather than later. I didn't think she was going to die so soon, but I'm like, this Love's going to take her out, and that's going to be kind of the catalyst and kind of the backbone of this season. It's like Love is constantly want to protect her family. She's going to continuously be jealous of whoever Joe is obsessed with, and that's exactly what happens in this first episode as they are friends at the barbecue or the little dinner barbecue they have at the Conrad's house. She mentions that she wants to open up her bakery. We see Natalie shows her to a vacant property available for a 3-year lease. They get to talking, and then we cut to her Love finding that box in the garage. It's all, again, Joe's a freako. He's a stalker, man. There's panties, there's tampons, there's the blood that he helped with her. I mean, he's a psycho. I mean, Joe, he's an anti-hero in a sense, but we still can't forget the dude's, he got some issues. But she finds that box. They go down to the basement, and I'm thinking she's going to maybe knock her out and put her in a cage and inevitably kill her. Nope, she has an anger problem, as we know. She takes that axe and slices her neck. It would have been more visceral. She chopped her head off, but she chops her neck, and we end with her killing the new interest of Joe, who, is the catalyst. And the point of this season is, again, seeing Love as she thinks she's protecting her family by killing people, which is just a effed up way to think about it anyway. But I have to say, episode 1 was really fantastic. Let me know what were your favorite moments in episode 1. Did you predict Natalie to die so early? Let's talk about it in the comments. Which brings us, let's move on to episode 2. Now, this is where, to me, this is what the heart of this show was. It was seeing these two go back and forth as they're entering couples therapy, which I thought was so funny, with them kind of talking below surface of like what's really going on the surface. Like, they can't obviously say to therapists, we are killers, as she says to them. You guys aren't killers. Husband and wife say they're going to kill each other all the time, which is funny, foreshadowing what ended up happening at the end of the show. But it was just really that dynamic of seeing them, Joe trying to pick up for his wife. Again, happy wife, happy life. He's trying to do everything that he can, thinking of ways of like, okay, how are we going to spin this? We got to make sure that we are clean with it. We got to make sure that we get everything in order, as he is going to be responsible for taking Natalie, which, by the way, Henry, right off the bat, he's already in their mommy and daddy stuff as they bring the child to the murder scene, which I'm just like, this is not a good family dynamic. But we see Joe trying to figure it all out, trying to cover up the murder as they have this party to attend to, and it's teeth removing, it's toes removing. It's just the classic stuff that we've seen for Joe as they realize that she has a ring that's tracking them, because the Conrad family are all into fitness and everyone in town has a tracker, so they have to rebury her. They have to find a new spot for her. In the meantime, again, we're seeing that the therapy session is ultimately kind of working, because they're able to, without giving away too much, able to work out their situation. They want to make this work. They want to try to make this family work. And I think Joe and Love really want to make this family work because they weren't able to make their family work. And I think that speaks to, the show, again, it's over the top. It has plot holes. It has plot conveniences, but there is some heart and some things to take away from this show. I think in reality, a lot of people, when they do have children of their own, they want to make up for the mistakes of their parents. They want to be better than their parents, which I think we should all strive to be better than where we come from. Not like pushing or downplaying how our parents raise us positively or negatively, but we want better for our children, right? I think that's something that everyone wants. But in doing so, sometimes you kind of do things out of place. You sometimes react out of anger. You sometimes react like, oh, this is reminding me of my mom or my dad. And that's really kind of the heart of this second episode, is they're trying to make things work because they want to do better than when they were raised. And this is where they vow to never kill again, which I'm like, okay, we'll see how much that lasts as they're building out the cage that we've obviously gotten from the first two seasons. They build the cage in the bakery, which I'm like, that's not the best idea. And we'll obviously get into that, as at this point, this is where Love gets introduced to Theo, as we learn that Theo is the stepchild of Matthew, which, man, Theo, what a dumb 18-year-old kid who ultimately gets played by Love at the end of the show, which we'll obviously talk about. But nonetheless, they realize, Love and Joe realize that, okay, the stage is set. They now notice she's missing. We really got to put our game faces on and pretend we're the nice new neighbors that will never kill our neighbors before, which brings us into episode 3, which obviously the town knows about the missing. This is where I said it kind of reminded me a little bit of Gone Girl, because some people were thinking that Natalie just ran off. She wasn't happy in her marriage. Matthew's always at work. She's just having another episode essentially, but everyone in town is, pretending to be sad. And again, there's a bunch of phony people in this town. But we see that this is obviously Joe's not his first rodeo, as he's trying to normalize the situation, keep his wife tempered down, keep her in a good spirit, trying to be the best husband that he can be. But again, they're struggling to be those nice neighbors because they have a lot of anger inside of them. Meanwhile, we see that Matthew is kind of almost playing the Ben Affleck, where he's kind of acting like the husband that has something to do with his wife's murder, but he had nothing to do with it. But of course, he's not talking to the media. He's shutting them out. He's not being the, as they say in these murder cases, when there's a couple involved, it's always the husband. It's always the husband. And there's a lot to be said about that, as it was the husband when it came to Joe and Love in a little bit in this season here. But this is where I want to focus more on Marianne. This is where Joe and he gets a job from her. And at first I'm like, maybe he won't be obsessed with her, because the show didn't really give you that inkling that they were going to be a thing, because he was, doing his thing with his wife. He wanted to obviously keep his killings at a low, and he knew at this point, I can't fall in love. I can't obsess with someone because my wife's going to end up killing them. So I'm thinking, oh, this will be an interesting dynamic to see them maybe just kind of be friends. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Love is just going to kill her, thinking that they had a relationship, which they ultimately do. But I did like that Marianne character and what she brought to the show. Meanwhile, we see that she is starting to get like little inklings of like, which is it's very interesting to see that Marianne end up falling for Joe, because I thought that when she noticed that Natalie got her the book, she's probably like, oh, here's your stereotypical white husband, newborn child, sleeping with another woman and all that. And I was thinking she was going to always never be into Joe because it was very obvious that they were flirting. It was very obvious that there was something there. So I was always thinking that Marianne, even if Joe did approach her, which she inevitably did, I thought she was going to push him away. But we know Joe, he has his ways with words and ultimately gets the girl that he wants. But nonetheless, Joe is being investigated by the police officers. He says that he was, doing something in the parking lot, and that's why him and Natalie spoke. And he's always, able to find a way out of situations. But Love, as I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, she is so damn messy. I was thinking when she hired Theo and he had that spare key, I thought Theo very early on in the season was going to see that cage, and inevitably he does get the key. Or not get the key, but he goes down to the basement. But I was thinking very early on that they were going to put someone in the cage, and then Theo, it was going to be like this weird, not love triangle, but it was going to be this somewhat of a love triangle where Theo was going to somehow get into the mix, and they were going to have to try to maneuver him into the situation and kind of, figure him out in the whole thing, which it kind of worked that way because Love and him were trying to be on the same page, and she was playing him the whole time, but it didn't work out the way I thought it was in regards to Theo being more in the mix. But again, Theo was really trying to get into the pants of Love in this season, and he inevitably does. Meanwhile, this is the episode in which we see him, their child Henry, he gets the measles, he goes to the party. We see that, Joe gets sick. Joe thinks he, gave his son the measles, which we end up finding out who really did. But let me know in the comments, how did you all feel about how the show tackled the whole vaccination situation? Now, again, this show was obviously shot during the pandemic, but how did you all feel about that? Was it too on the nose? Did you feel like it was organic to the story? I thought it was a little bit too on the nose, like a political stand. And again, I'm not one of those people like keep politics out of my entertainment, but I thought it was a little bit forced. I thought it kind of forced his hand heavily, in my opinion, in regards to when we inevitably find out as Joe at this point, he's jumping over the fence of Matthew and they're having a conversation about fatherhood, which I thought was a good moment for those two, and how all that played out. But we get the shocking moment where Gil comes to the bakery, tells Love that their kids gave them the measles because they don't give them vaccinations. They don't feel like they should put stuff into their kids, which obviously, like I said, is a whole conversation within itself. And Love, being Love, hey, Gil, pops him upside the head, which I thought that he died immediately. But this whole season, there were so many fake deaths, like people that I thought was dead. It was like, nope, surprise, they're still alive. But she hits him upside the head, knocking him out, taking advantage of that cage, which I thought that, again, the cage, Theo working there, I thought he was going to find Mr. Gill, but that didn't play out that way. But again, Love and that temper, she always has to protect her family, which brings us into episode 4. And like I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, this is episode 4, 5, and 6 were kind of on the weaker side as far as like entertaining factor, and just felt a little bit dry in the writing department. But we see that they spend most of the episode trying to get dirt on, and again, this is where I feel like it's not throwaway, it's not filler, but it was just not as engaging or compelling for me. But they're trying to get dirt on Gil the whole episode to use it for leverage on him. They find out that Gil's son, which didn't go anywhere, which, I mean, it did go somewhere because he took his own life, but I thought that was going to maybe play more into the season, which it really didn't. But it's really his son that's really getting to things. His wife is doing like a bunch of cover-ups, and this is where Love is like, oh, we can kill two birds with one stone. We can blame Gil for the murder and the missing of Natalie, which is ultimately what they do. They take his fingerprints, but unfortunately, Gil, kills himself in the cage. They plant the axe in the forest when they're doing the whole Gone Girl looking for her body, but they use the axe. They use Gil's, suicide as a way to kind of play it into the narrative, and essentially it works. They make it seem that Gil was and Natalie had a relationship, that Gil went off the rails. He didn't protect his family, and he ultimately took his own life in results of having an affair, taking the life of Natalie. So again, yes, it was very clever of how they figured everything out, but I was just like, I wish we can get a little bit more with the couple, as them as a couple. As of course they're trying to figure it out, being on the same team. But that episode wasn't my favorite out of the 10. But that brings us to episode 5, which we get this, I want to say 6 months. It was like a 6 month gap between when the Gil situation happened. At this point, their marriage is looking good. Their business is looking good. Everything's starting to kind of play into fruition. Love is really good friends with Carrie at this point. But Joe, he confronts Love about this whole Theo situation, because at this point they didn't sleep with each other, but they've kissed each other. And she's like, yes, I kissed him. And I think we can use Theo as like a way to make sure that everything's good with Matthew. But this is where she wants Joe to become friends, which is the whole point of this episode, was seeing Joe and Carrie, which, like I mentioned, Carrie and Sherry give me a spinoff show. I end up really liking those characters, but they want Joe to be friends with people more than the people at the library. They go out to the woods with the boys, and Joe, he gets into it with Carrie, pushes him off the ledge, which I'm like, dude, did he just kill Carrie and they're going to have another murder they're going to have to cover up? But no, again, I've lost count on how many times people died but really didn't die. But Carrie, he fell off the cliff, which I thought was crazy that he didn't die, but he doesn't die. He actually is like pretty happy with Joe, like, man, you're an animal, embrace him and whatnot. And this is where Joe is like finally felt embraced. He feels like he's part of the crew. He feels like he's normalized, right? And these are people that accepted him for who he is and in his psychotic ways to a certain extent, not knowing who he really is. But surprise, surprise, Theo and Love, they do have sex, and I'm like, oh, she's going to get pregnant. That was the first thing I thought, because I'm like, this unprotected sex, and, there's a bit of a scare there, but we end the episode with them getting back to the trip, and this is where Joe officially gets the jersey out of retirement, and he's now obsessed with Marianne, and now he's going to keep her on her radar. But again, the whole Carrie fake out death thing was a little bit overplayed, because again, at that point, it's like, how many times are people going to pretend to die and come back? But it was in this episode that, again, Love and Theo, I'm like, oh, here's baby number 2, which brings us into episode 6. And as I expected, they immediately kick off the episode with Love having a pregnancy test, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is really going to shake things up, which brings to me, I'm going to talk about it later in episode 10 in regards to, I really do think they should have kept Love alive, and we'll talk about if Love, if she's really dead or not. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But she has her pregnancy test. They set up the whole thing of obviously Joe is, again, he's stalking Marianne at this point. They're both doing wrong things. They're both in like these relationships they know they can't be in. They're both obsessing. Love, I think her attraction to Theo played more into the attention. She's not getting attention from Joe. She feels like she's being ignored. They're not having the sex that they used to. So I can understand that. The only thing that I had a little bit of an issue with Love having this thing with Theo, he's not a child. I want to say he was 18, 19, maybe even 20. But I'm like, I find it weird that she's in this relationship with this younger guy because of her tragic backstory with 40 dating, which again, that was obviously child abuse, and that was obviously taking advantage of a younger person. But I'm like, I would think Love wouldn't play in that ballpark, just because there is an age difference. There is a sense of like, you're an adult, he's a young adult. But I was like, I get the intention thing, but I'm like, I don't think, from what you all have given me, that she would have invested herself in this relationship. But again, like I said, I know the whole thing of her being in this relationship, this entanglement with Theo, is because he's given her the attention that Joe isn't. But going to Joe and Marianne, he thinks this is the perfect person, as he always does, right? This is my soulmate. She's into books. She has a child. She has an issue at hand that she wants to be taken care of. And that's where we see, during all this, again, these two couples doing terrible things. This is where Matthew is like, I think that our neighbors had something to do with the murder, and this is where he gets the private investigator involved to look into his wife's death. Meanwhile, we get the introduction to the Ryan character, the news reporter, which I'm like, I don't think Marianne would ever date a lame like Ryan, but hey, she was a different person at the time. They were both addicts, as she's mentioned at this point, but you can clearly see he's abused her. He's a very abusive ex-husband. I don't know if he abused a daughter at any point, verbally or even physically, but he's just a douchebag. And obviously now Joe has his sights on him. But this, at the same time, we get in the backstory of Fiona and everything that happened with her and Nurse Fiona, and obviously Beck. And this is where Joe's like, I have a pattern. I always have to fix things. And he's like, I'm not going to fall in love with you. I don't want you to break our marriage. But we know Joe, he can't keep his obsession at bay at any points. But we end up seeing, long story short, Love dodges a bullet. She gets her period. She has a big fight with her mom at the little vineyard situation that they have. And we end up in the episode with Love wanting to use Theo to see what dirt they have on Joe and Love to end episode 6, which brings me back into the show again. Episodes 4, 5, and 6, there were some interesting things, but the first half, episodes 1, 2, and 3, and then 7, 8, 9, 10 are really kind of the best parts of the show. And episode 7 kind of kicks this second half off, where it's just like essentially who's going to die first between Love and Joe, as we get this family day between Joe and Henry and Marianne and her daughter. They're out, and the at this point, Ryan is trying to do everything in his power to not, make sure his ex-wife doesn't get custody. Matthew, at this point, he hires a hacker to look into everyone's door system, which again is a plot convenience. There was so much stuff that Joe and Love did, and all the town has cameras, and like you telling me no one saw Ryan die, which we'll talk about in this episode. You're telling me that no one saw the bodies being dragged out and the fights, especially the episode 8 fight. I'm like, there's so many plot conveniences. You didn't see that footage, but neither here nor there. He's hacking to the system. Meanwhile, Joe plants the drugs on Ryan, but that ultimately doesn't work because Ryan's been on drugs this whole time. He pretends to be clean. He pretends that he doesn't want to relapse, but he's been on drugs for a very long time. So Joe's plan blows up in his face, leaving Ryan to suspect Joe of like, you better watch it, stay away from my ex-wife, or I'm going to destroy you, because he has all those possibilities to do so. But we see that it's at this point that Sherry makes her move on Love and wants to have Joe and Love do this couples therapy. Like I said, Carrie and Sherry were like the Will and Jada of this show, entanglements and having an open marriage nonetheless. But either way, we kind of wrap up the episode with Dottie taking Henry and burning her vineyard and being drunk. That's actually kind of the last like plot. Again, I wasn't a fan of Dottie. I don't even know why she's in the show. I get why she's there, but I could have went without her. She takes Henry, she loved, says never see my family again, and they want to take her to rehab. But we end up in an episode with Joe finding out about what happened with Love's first husband, and this is where Joe's like, oh man, I've been worrying about protecting my wife. I need to protect myself from my wife because I'm fair game. She can kill me at any point, so I have to stay on my P's and Q's. So that's kind of how they wrap up that 7th episode, which brings us to my personal favorite episode, episode 8. I really do think that they used Sherry and Carrie as a Will Smith type of characters, as they have an entanglement situation in this episode. And like I said, this is my favorite episode of the show, as Joe pretends to be, wants to be swingers to please his wife. Because again, if he doesn't please Love, as Dottie told him, you might be the next one to die. But the highlight of this episode to me too, that fight between Matthew and Theo, that was like I felt that drama. I felt that even though we didn't really get a ton of stuff with them, I felt that was like an authentic stepfather trying to be a good dad to this person that's has a good relationship with his mom and just lost his stepmom with Natalie. So I thought that fight, and he kicked them out, I was like, that's some really good acting between those two, and the best scene between those two as well. But meanwhile, we have bigger fish to fry, as it is sex night, ladies and gentlemen, and I laughed so hard between Carrie and Sherry, as Carrie, is looking in the mirror. He can only have sex with himself. Sherry having sex with Joe, and the safe word, Hakuna Matata. Again, all that stuff to me was fantastic. And when Joe's having sex with Carrie, he's thinking about Marianne. It was some good stuff in this episode, man. But the moment of truth, ladies and gentlemen, as Joe and Love can't take it. She's not in it because she's like, where were you at? Where were you going? Where were you? You weren't looking at me when you were having sex with Carrie. Who's this new girl? As she's starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together, they go downstairs and she shouts, "That's why I killed Natalie for you." Love, love, love. You gotta love her, right? Unfortunately, my favorite couple heard them as they try to escape, and I'm like, I had to suspend my disbelief. I'm like, listen, you telling me Carrie can't handle Joe's skinny ass, and the same for Carrie, but nonetheless, they take him out, they put him in the cage, and again, it was just like, the cameras, no one saw this. You're telling me that Matthew didn't hear the commotion? Matthew, he approaches Joe in the next episode about the commotion last night. He didn't see any of that. Again, there's a lot of plot conveniences in this show, plot holes per se. But again, even with the plot hole, that was my favorite episode of the show. So fun, so funny. And then again, the Will and Jade entanglement. That was my favorite episode of the show. Let me know what you thought about episode 8. But let's wrap up with episode 9 and 10, as Theo wants to run away with Love, and Love is playing him Theo is like, Joe's an abusive husband, this, that, and the other. But we see that at this point, Love is really using this young man and taking advantage of his emotions for her, as Joe and Marina have sex for the first time, and she learns about what happened with Ryan and trying to get Joe involved in the court case. But at this point, Joe is head over heels for this girl, and the same for her. She's really getting into Joe. Carrie tries to give, at this point, Carrie and Cherry are in the cage. She tries to give Love advice about how to handle the situation with Matthew, about finding out about the footage and using that to their advantage and putting that on his blog, which ultimately leads Matthew into shutting down his whole camera situation and not using the evidence against Love and Joe. But speaking of Love, she's like Jigsaw in this episode, live or die, as she puts the gun in the cage for Sherry and Carrie to figure out who's going to be the parent to make it out alive. But again, messy couple as Joe confronts Ryan. Again, another fake out death as he pushes him off the parking lot ledge, but he's still alive, so he passionately stabs him a million times in the stomach, which again, where the hell is the cameras? No one, the guy has cameras in his damn town, as this is like a string of burglaries. So Joe, again, plot convenience, plot armor, gets away with that murder. Meanwhile, Theo looks at the footage. He sees that Joe was pretending to be Natalie. He approaches, he wants to call Love and tell her about all this stuff. But Theo ends up finding that cage, which I thought he was going to find sooner rather than later. But he finds that at this point, Sherry's her ear is missing because he shot the gun to try to get out of the cage. Theo learns the truth from Love and doesn't want to believe it and will do anything to protect Love. And again, Love finds him at the bakery. She's like, go ahead, don't ever tell anyone. He's like, okay. She doesn't trust him, hits him over the head, another fake out death as he hits her head and falls down the stairs. I'm thinking that he's dead, but we'll talk about that in the next episode. But episode 9 was really kept me on the edge of my seat, which brings us to the finale. We're going to talk about the ending. I'm going to wrap things up here with my predictions of season 4. But episode 10, Love wants another baby. Joe accepts. Meanwhile, we see that Sherry shoots Carrie in the leg for shooting him. We see that Marianne and Joe plan to leave town with each other, and Theo is still alive as Joe ultimately takes him to the hospital, which I'm like, wow, you're really trying to be a good person here, taking this person that knows your whole situation to the hospital. But all of this shakes out. Meanwhile, Love finds out about Joe and his love affairs with Marianne, and he is more than afraid for his life. And it's time for him to have that family discussion as they're having the discussion about the lies and deception. And Joe says, I want a divorce, which you don't want to say that to Love. And she admits to killing James by poisoning him and temporarily paralyzing him. And she uses the same thing on her husband, Joe. And she just wants to save her marriage as she invites Marianne to the house. And meanwhile, she's still doing her domestic thing, getting the cupcakes ready for the other neighbor. But we see that Matthew finds Joe on the floor. And again, another plot convenience. Why he didn't call the cops, I know he's like, I want you to get as much pain and everything that Natalie had. But I'm like, in the real world, so he would have called the cops, even if it was punishment. That would have been punishment for Joe to go to jail, as well as Love. But he finds out what his son's is. That's all he wanted. So Joe gives him the Theo's by blinking where he is at the hospital. But meanwhile, Marianne, she comes to the house. She has her conversation with Love. The intention is for Love to kill her, but we see that her daughter walks in. She has a moment with her where she tells her, just get out of the situation. Just try to be the best mother you can be and move on with your life. She ultimately lets her out of the situation. But surprise, surprise, as Love is about to kill Joe, he tells the audience, tells Love, I've been playing you the whole time. Your Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve situation with the forbidden fruit, I looked it up. You tried to poison me. I have an antidote. I took the pills from, Carrie's situation. We see that he poisons her and ultimately kills his wife. Till death do us part. I don't know if she's dead. We'll talk about that here in a second. But wrapping up the episode, we see that Joe ultimately, which I kind of feel bad for Henry because he didn't want his son in the system, but he does give his son to Dante and his husband. They seem to have wanted to have a family. So he lets his son get off in a better situation. He doesn't want his son to grow up in the system. We see that we get all in while he sets up this perfect plan that it was Love. She not only kills herself, she killed Joe. He puts his toe in the pie, leaving some evidence that he burnt in the fire. And again, it sets up the stage that Love and Joe were the ones that did all the killings, more so Love, and setting up again the perfect murder as he plays out that he died in this fire. More importantly, we see that Carrie and Sherry survive. They're doing TED Talks about cages and businesses. So again, give me that spinoff. I would watch that show. But we wrap up with thinking that Joe's moving back to New York, only to find out that he's in Paris looking for Marianne and her daughter. And again, if you all don't remember, the reason he went to Paris is because that's where she grew up. That's where she was, she lived there for the first 6 years of her life. And she told him, once I get my daughter back, I'm going to go to Paris. We're going to paint. We're going to live that life. So that's why he's in Paris, to look for her, the love of his life. Not as though she's going to be happy to see him. Like, you're supposed to be dead and you've been killing people. So we'll see how that works out, which brings me to my season 4 predictions. We're going to see Joe in Paris, or I should say Nick in Paris, as he has a new identity as Nick, looking for the love of his life. But I don't think it's going to be that easy. I think by the time he finds her, she's going to be moving on. And we're going to obviously see him wanting to take out this new guy, whether he's a good guy, a bad guy, or a good girl or a bad girl. We're going to see Joe try to get the love of his life. And I don't know, man. I have this feeling that Love, did she die in that fire? We've seen people come back from the dead before. Hence, Candace, is Love really dead? I mean, the optics makes it look like she's dead, but let me know in the comments, will Love make a return next season, or is she officially dead? And also, what characters from season 2? The girl, the Delilah's sister, will she come back in season 4? Will we get Sherry and Carrie back in season 4? Dottie's still out there. Will she want to find vengeance for her daughter, and knowing that Joe might have had something to do with it? I think so, but I want to know your thoughts. Again, what was your favorite episode, your favorite moment, your twist, your turn, things that didn't work for you in the season? Let's talk about it in the comments below. 45 minutes later, I appreciate every single one of you all that stuck around to this point in the video. Before you leave the video, make sure to like, share, comment, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that bell. That way you don't miss any of my other content. Hope you enjoyed this review. Hope you're staying safe. Before you leave, subscribe to my channel, check out my other content, and we'll see you in the next video.